Pastor Francis Dixon. This is the greatest story I think I've heard in years. Pastor Francis Dixon is a revivalist minister from Lansdowne Baptist Church in England. And he wrote a book back in the 1970s. But Pastor Francis Dixon was a revivalist minister from Lansdowne Baptist Church in England. He had a man in his church named Peter share a testimony. How did you come to Jesus? And Peter stood up and said, well, I was serving in the Royal Navy. I was stationed in Sydney, Australia. I was in an area called George Street, and a shabbily dressed man bumped into me and said, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. He said, which one is it, heaven or hell? Do you know where you're going to spend eternity? And he said, it just kind of flabbergasted me. I thought that was rude. It was weird. I didn't know what the deal was. But he said, would you please read this Bible tract and consider my question? He said, I went to my pastor and I started reading the Bible and I was converted through that. This is 100% true story. His name was Peter. Okay. He shared that story in another church in England about Peter. So the pastor's saying, you're not going to believe this story with this man named Peter. When he's over in another church, a man named Noel popped up and said the same thing. I was in the Royal Navy, stationed in Sydney, Australia. A rough-looking man came up and asked me a question, heaven or hell, do you know where you're going to spend eternity? Handed me a Bible tract. Pastor Francis Dixon preached in the city of Adelaide in Eastern Australia. A young lady said the same thing. A year later, he was in India, heard the same story, Jamaica. Finally, after hearing these stories about a man in Sydney, Australia on George Street, he was speaking to 1,000 Navy chaplains in Atlanta, Georgia. The chaplain general was welcoming him before he spoke to the 1,000 chaplains. And the pastor said, can you tell me your conversion? He said, sure, I'll tell it to you. This is verbatim. While doing exercises in the South Pacific, we stopped in Sydney Harbor. I got off a bus on George Street, blind drunk, and this ghost of a man jumped out in front of me, pushed a pamphlet in my hand and said, sailor, are you saved? If you die tonight, are you going to heaven? The fear of God hit me immediately. I was shock sober, ran back to the ship and sought out the chaplain. He led me to Christ. I soon began to prepare for the ministry under his guidance. I'm now in charge of 1,000 chaplains that you're about to speak to who are bent on soul winning. Finally, Pastor Dixon visited Sydney, Australia. This is the place. And he talked to a church, and the first person he said, by any chance, do you know a man down at George Street who, the person stopped and said, it's Mr. Frank Jenner. He said, seriously? He said, yeah, he's probably down there now. We went and looked for him, couldn't find him. Somebody said he was bedridden in the hospital. Mr. Frank Jenner, when the pastor went to meet with him in the hospital, he's sharing about somebody in India telling the story, Lansdowne, England, the story, and the eastern side of Australia, in Jamaica, in Atlanta, all these people that had come to Christ. And all of a sudden, Mr. Jenner in his hospital bed was getting very emotional. He said, well, tell me, why did you do what you did? Here's what Mr. Jenner said. When I came to Christ, I promised him that I would share Jesus as a simple witness to at least 10 people a day, every day. The best place to do this was George Street. I got lots of rejections, but a lot of people courteously took the Bible tract. In over 28 years of doing this, guys, do the math. 28 years, 10 people a day asking that question. He said, in over 28 years of doing this, sir, I've never heard of one single person coming to Jesus until today. Frank Jenner died 2 weeks later. God gave him an assignment. And he took that assignment seriously. He implemented that assignment and he saw it through. We need more Frank Jenners in this world. And Jasper today is a great place to begin. Men, let me challenge you. Pick your day. Say, God, show me my assignment. He's going to show it to you through the Word, prayer, circumstances, and godly counsel. Start it. See it through.